Time and time again here on Rising, we've talked about what issues are most important to younger voters. Consistently, they rank climate change or healthcare on number one more than cultural issues.
Friend of the show, Kyle Kulinski, predicts that the Biden campaign will mistakenly embrace cultural tokenist issues over policy issues that young people care about. Kyle hosts the Kyle Kulinski Show. Great friend of our show. Joins us now via Skype. How's it going, Kyle?
It's going pretty well. How are you guys?
Good.
Excellent. So update us on your status. You now must have a very favorable opinion of Joe Biden since he knocked the Medicare age down from 65 to 60. Massive olive branch extended to folks like you. Tell us your thoughts and feelings about that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's just insulting because people were showing articles from 2016 where Hillary Clinton, with all of her flaws, said, let's lower the Medicare age to 50 or 55. So, we're 4 years on now, and there's less of an olive branch being offered. And it's just sad because even the media is in on this game where they pretend like every headline said, Joe moves left. And it's like every Bernie supporter I talk to, including myself, looks at this as a real slap in the face. And they're just framing it as in well, they have nothing to complain about now because look at what he put out there. And it's so sad.
Right, and that's the crazy part, Kyle, because I since I spend so much time with you guys, I'm like, wow, he's basically not giving them anything and also trying to get headlines, which he can get attacked from the right. And so he's winning no favors whenever it comes to this. One interesting thing, though, I wanted to get your take on is kind of like a post-mortem that we've talked a little bit about, and I've seen you tweeting about, which is what the shift in maybe the tone from the Bernie 2016 to the 2020 campaign. Nate Silver had an interesting take where he noted that based on working class vote patterns in Michigan in particular, that it's possible that Bernie moved a little bit more from economic populism to more of an intersectional leftist message. And that economic populist message is probably best exemplified in that America ad from 2016. Let's take a look at that, and I want to get your reaction on that answer. Let's take a listen to the ad. What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, so I have, I guess, a little bit of a different take on this. I agree with the overall sentiment that if lefties kind of embrace patriotism and kind of give in on some labeling stuff, that it will definitely help electorally. I believe that. But at the same time, that ad, I'm not as big of a fan as everybody else because it almost seems, I don't know the right word for it, maybe a little too pedantic because there's not even a single word spoken. So it's just music, and you guys know me. I'm maybe a little hardened by this whole political game, and I'm like, are you not going to say anything about Medicare for all, or you're not going to what are you doing?
What about the Green New Deal? Yeah. I know that ad, to me it has an emotion to it and spoke to the grassroots nature of this coming together of the campaign. I thought it was incredibly effective, and they really didn't have a single ad this cycle that was particularly memorable. But it speaks to a larger question. Why do you think, as Sagar was asking, that he struggled this time around with rural voters, with white working class voters who backed him last time? Was it that it was really more of an anti-Hillary vote, or was there something different in his pitch? Or did he come to be associated more with the Democratic Party than with being kind of his own independent entity?
I think it was a little bit of the Hillary thing and a little bit of the last thing, that he was more now associated with the Democratic Party and not, just purely an outsider. But I actually, on the point that, maybe he shifted a little too far in the cultural direction, I'm not sure I buy that, because I think, yes, you could argue some of his surrogates did that, but I never saw it from Bernie. Bernie, really never changed his stump speech. And so I think that might be, and I'm one of the people who's inclined to agree with such a criticism, because I'm not a fan of the stuff that goes too hard on the cultural side, but I thought that isn't the best explanation as to why things went different this time, even though a lot of people are bringing it up as if it's like a big part of it.
Sure. What is the best explanation then, Kyle?
Well, how much time you got? Jeez.
As much as you'll give us,
What do you
Kyle.
want, man?
So, first and foremost, you're not supposed to, play the game of like, well, it's not all of our fault, because the corporate Democrats did that and they look kind of pathetic when they like Russiagate, blame Comey, blame this, blame that. And that looks silly. I agree on that. But there are certain things that were extenuating circumstances that really kind of doomed Bernie, whether or not we're comfortable with analyzing it. One of them is what I'm calling Bloody Monday, which is when Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar dropped out the day before Super Tuesday and threw their endorsements behind Biden. I really, really, really think that completely changed the nature of the race. And I think that if that didn't happen, we would be talking about Bernie winning a plurality. Now, having said that, that doesn't absolve Bernie and his campaign for the mistakes, because the fact of the matter is you have to adjust on the ground. You have to do that. This is what politics is. Somebody's going to throw a curveball at you and you got to adjust, and they didn't do that. So what I would say is there's a little bit of truth in every postmortem of the Bernie campaign. So one school of thought is he needed to be more antagonistic. And I agree with that, but the antagonism needs to be directed in the right places. So namely, you do it with the media, you do it with the establishment, you do it with Joe Biden. He should have called him corrupt. He shouldn't have called him my friend. He should have been a lot more clear. When it comes to electability, I think he needed to make strong arguments on electability and not just say, oh, we think we're the best suited to win, but Joe could win too. I think he probably had to say something like, we just ran the experiment in 2016 and Hillary Clinton lost, and you guys are going to make the same mistake. Joe Biden is just like Hillary Clinton. I'm like FDR. Who are you going to pick? You got to pick me because I'm actually going to win. I'm the real safe option. He's not the safe option. Are you kidding me? So he needed to say things like that. He didn't say things like that. In terms of being another, school of thought is he needed to be less antagonistic. And there's actually some truth in that too, because as much as you're antagonistic towards the establishment and Joe Biden and the media, you should be not antagonistic at all towards the older, middle-of-the-road voters. And I think that they should have had some overtures to reach out to those people. And I think that it didn't help at all that they did the campaign like hashtag no middle ground. I don't think it helped at all that they call themselves Democratic Socialists. Bernie could have basically pivoted without pivoting by saying, I'm not changing a single thing on policy, but I'm going to call myself a moderate because I think these ideas are just flat out moderate. So I think there were ways that you could bridge that gap. And I think that's a pretty solid breakdown. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I could go on.
I'm sure you could and you will. So what happens now? You have this whole generation, really two generations of young people who their first experience in politics may have been with involvement in the Bernie Sanders campaign, their first time donating, their first time organizing, their first time phone banking, their first time really expressing a political opinion at all may have been in association with the Bernie Sanders campaign. What does the future look like for those folks, and what would you encourage them to do?
Well, what's interesting is that the people who kind of got their start in politics with this election, they had a very similar experience to 2016, to people who did it in the last election cycle, because there's all this hope and all this excitement around a candidate who actually represents young people, and then it gets dashed, and we're all like, oh my God, what now? This feels like there's no hope. But again, I don't think it's to have no hope, I don't think is logical, because with a few changes, we could be talking about the candidate being Bernie Sanders, and now you have a free-for-all in Trump versus Bernie in the general election. But in my opinion, all the energy now should be put towards pushing specific issues. I'm definitely in favor of something like a general strike with a clear list of demands when it comes to economic populism, where we could get a broad coalition of support. So, that's what I'm focused on now. And the other thing is, the new issue that I'm obsessed with is this idea of a national direct democracy law where, we can kind of circumvent and go around the corruption. And wouldn't it be amazing if every time we went to go vote in a presidential election every 4 years, everybody voted on the top 5 most important issues in a similar way that they have direct ballot initiatives in the states? And we could go and vote on, hey, what do you guys think? Sorry, soccer, but we could vote on legal marijuana, for example. We could vote on raising the minimum wage. There are ways to fix the system that are kind of unique that haven't been discussed in detail. Mike Gravel back in the day spoke about this, but I think it's time to resurrect ideas like that, because direct advocacy, certainly at a time like right now, I think is the best possible thing moving forward. And also, I would say for everybody out there who was a donor to Bernie Sanders, take that money and now give it to Shahid Buttar, who's running against Nancy Pelosi, because that could be our next shot across the bow if you're populist left.
So last question for you, Kyle. We've asked a lot of prominent, kind of left media figures, which is one of the things we learned this time around is that the media is far more powerful than a lot of people thought. I think that any of us really thought whenever it came, especially to the Democratic Party. What is the strategy for overcoming that in the next 4 years?
That's a great point. I mean, and I saw that you guys asked Cenk Uygur about that. I mean, the short answer is I don't know. In a perfect world, I would hope that outlets like mine and yours and others in this space, we grow and we get big enough where we're not just responding to the media narrative, we become part of the media narrative. I would love that. Is that going to happen? Honestly, I have no idea. So, I mean, what I'm more interested in is what would happen if we had a left-wing candidate who actually had Bernie's policies, Bernie's record, Bernie's integrity, but had Trump's I don't care energy. What would happen in a situation like that? Because I reckon those numbers of, Democratic voters kind of liking the media a lot more than Republican voters, I reckon we could change that. We could change it pretty quickly if you have a charismatic leader who kind of has that Trump energy but Bernie's policies. So, but that won't be tested until we actually get a candidate like that.
Yeah, well, the other thing Trump understood, he actually understood the centrality of earned media, and he forced them to cover him. Remember, he'd call in a Morning Joe, love to have him on. They were all happy to broadcast the Trump show because it was provocative, because it generated ratings, because it was entertaining. He forced them. He has sort of weaponized like the capitalistic bottom line against them. It's like, you can't resist these ratings over here. And so I think you need a little bit more of that attitude versus the Sanders team understood the media was never going to give them a fair break. So they tried to build their own alternative media ecosystem, was very successful in building that alternative media ecosystem. But they also needed to compete on the battlefield of legacy media and force them to have to cover them, even if it was in a controversial way. Like when he said, when he called out Jeff Bezos of Washington Post controlled by Jeff Bezos, and that was controversial and that got a lot of coverage. That was a great moment for him. There were some moments like that, but overall, they didn't really try to change the trajectory of the dominant media narratives. That's
right. And I also think the thing that Trump does that makes so much sense is that he always picks the right targets. So he doesn't he very rarely picks a fight with somebody who has actual support, which is why you saw he very rarely went after Bernie Sanders, because he knows Bernie had actual support. What he does is he looks at the people who are kind of paper tigers, and he's like, I hate this person, and I'm going to bet that most of America hates this person, and so I'm going to go after this person. And he did it wonderfully. Look what he did to Marco Rubio. Look what he did to Jeb Bush. The media has, there's a 13% block in the country that has a great deal of trust in the media. Congress has a 22% approval rating. These are institutions that are not liked. So Trump knows all I have to do is appear to be more likable than them, which is not hard, Right. And so the fact that he drops the filter, the fact that he doesn't play their game, and the fact that he picks the easy targets, I think that makes it so even people who don't like Trump, like me, I have those moments where it's like he's playing like the enemy of my enemy is my friend game, and I'm like, yeah, go get that guy. I hate that guy too.
It was glorious watching him in the Republican primary just dismantle Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and all these. Oh, it was glorious. It was great fun. And then
He said at a Republican debate in South Carolina, he said to Jeb Bush, the towers came down under your brother. He didn't keep us safe.
Yeah.
And the audience exploded in cheers. And actually, it was Ben Shapiro, who I never agree with, but he made a good point at the time. He said, the fact that he could say that in a Republican debate and get cheers means that this thing is over. Because if a Democrat had said that, they'd be like, boo. But Trump says it, and they're like, yes.
Yes.
No, because there was a lot of people, I've talked about it with Crystal so many times, people were waiting for decades for somebody to just call out the neocon establishment, just waiting, and nobody would do it. And then Trump came along, and they all hated George W. Bush for the Iraq War, and he finally said it. And it was that ability to call out his own and chart that course, which aligned with the base, is what put him over the top. But we could talk all day, Kyle. We got to go. Thank you so much for joining us, man. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kyle. Good to see you.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you, too. Have a good one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll have more Rising for you after this.